In the late 1970s, ABBA was untouchable. They ruled the charts, sold millions, and turned pop into a global language. But by the early 80s, everything was breaking apart: two divorces, shattered trust, and a silence that crept into the studio. The world expected another anthem. What they delivered was something darker, fragile, and unforgettable. One final song that carried their name when the band itself was fading away. This isn't just music history, it's the sound of a farewell no one saw coming. When ABBA exploded onto the global stage in the mid-70s, the world saw perfection. Four bright, smiling faces singing irresistible pop melodies wrapped in glittering costumes became the ultimate fantasy of pop music. Their win at the Eurovision Song Contest in 1974 with Waterloo was more than just a victory, it was a cultural shift. ABBA transformed from an unknown Swedish act into a global phenomenon overnight, rewriting the rules for international pop success. Their sound was fresh, their image dazzling, and the chemistry between two real-life couples gave the band a sense of intimacy fans adored. But behind the scenes, the reality was more complex. Fame came at a cost. While the world imagined them as a picture-perfect family, the pressures of global stardom began to erode that foundation. Endless tours, grueling schedules, and constant media attention became part of their daily lives. The same romantic bonds that had made ABBA unique, Agnetha with Björn, Annie Frid with Benny, became fragile under the spotlight's relentless glare. The dream that brought them together was starting to tear them apart. These weren't fictional characters on stage, they were real people, and love doesn't always survive fame. By the late 70s, the cracks were impossible to hide. The first to break was Agnetha and Björn's marriage. In 1979, while ABBA was still riding high on global hits like Voulez-Vous and Chiquitita, they announced their separation. They insisted the band would go on, but every lyric they sang after that was loaded with irony. Imagine performing a love song in front of millions, while the person you once loved stands just a few feet away, now a stranger. For the audience, ABBA still radiated harmony, but inside, silence had begun to replace laughter. 2 years later, Benny and Annie Frid followed the same painful path. Their divorce in 1981 meant that the band's personal bonds, the ones that had made their success feel so organic, were completely gone. From that point on, the studio stopped being a sanctuary and started feeling like a courtroom, sterile, tense, and heavy with things left unsaid. Even their smiles and photo shoots became part of the performance, another layer of illusion for a public that wanted to believe in happy endings. ABBA had become experts at hiding heartbreak behind melody, but every note carried the weight of loss. And yet, in the middle of all this turmoil, something extraordinary happened. Their music began to change. Gone were the carefree lyrics of their early days. In their place came stories of loneliness, betrayal, and longing. Songs like The Winner Takes It All hinted at wounds that were no longer possible to conceal. The glitter was still there, but the cracks in the glass were showing, and through those cracks emerged some of their most hauntingly beautiful work. It was the beginning of the end, and everyone knew it, even if no one dared to say it out loud. Could love survive fame's relentless, crushing weight? By 1982, the signs were clear. ABBA was fading, and there was no way to stop it. Their last full album, The Visitors, released in late 1981, shocked fans with its tone. Gone was the euphoric energy of the disco years. In its place were dark, introspective tracks like One of Us, Slipping Through My Fingers, and When All Is Said and Done. The music reflected the reality. The band wasn't just evolving artistically, they were bleeding emotionally. These were songs written by people who had lived through heartbreak, and every lyric sounded like a private confession disguised as pop. Despite the fractures, they weren't ready to disappear without leaving one final mark. So, in the summer of 1982, ABBA returned to the studio to record a few more tracks. Among them was a song that would become their most enigmatic work, The Day Before You Came. From the very first note, It was clear this was not the ABBA of Dancing Queen or Mamma Mia. The tempo was slow, almost hypnotic, with minimal instrumentation. There were no soaring choruses, no hooks designed for radio. Instead, there was a haunting monotony, a deliberate calm that felt almost unsettling, like the quiet before a storm. Björn Ulvaeus wrote the lyrics, and they read like pages torn from a diary. The narrator recounts an ordinary day: train rides, reading the paper, a simple dinner, each detail painfully mundane. But beneath that simplicity lies a question. What changed after you came? Was it love? Was it tragedy? Or was it death? The ambiguity is what made the song so haunting, leaving listeners to wrestle with their own interpretations. It was storytelling at its purest, a minimalist approach that revealed the band's evolution from pop icons to mature artists unafraid of taking risks. For Agnetha, the song was a challenge. She delivered the vocal with icy precision, stripping away every trace of theatricality that had once defined ABBA's hits. Her performance is detached, almost numb, and yet that very detachment makes it devastating. It feels like listening to someone who has stopped expecting miracles, someone resigned to life's relentless routine. It was a performance born from truth, not artifice, and perhaps that's why it still resonates decades later. When The Day Before You Came was released in October 1982, it didn't top the charts, it didn't become a global anthem, and yet, its impact was seismic in a different way. Critics didn't know what to make of it, and casual fans were puzzled. But over time, the song gained a cult following, hailed as one of ABBA's most daring and emotionally complex works. It was their quiet farewell, a soundtrack of goodbye disguised as a pop single. No press conference, no grand finale, just one last haunting note as the curtain slowly fell on one of the greatest bands in music history. By the time ABBA reached their final recording sessions, the dynamic inside the studio had changed forever. Once it had been a playground of ideas, laughter echoing as Benny experimented with chords and Björn fine-tuned lyrics. But now, the air was thick with silence. Every session began with polite exchanges and ended with members retreating quickly to their separate lives. Songwriting was no longer just an art form, it had become a lifeline, a fragile bridge connecting people who were already drifting apart. The tension was palpable, but so was the desire to leave behind something meaningful. Björn carried the weight of words like never before. Gone were the days of carefree hooks designed to make the world dance. Instead, his lyrics now carried the burden of truth, a reflection of his own emotional unraveling after his divorce from Agnetha. He no longer wrote about lovers in paradise. He wrote about emptiness, monotony, and that haunting sense of what if. The Day Before You Came emerged from that darkness like a confession whispered to a stranger. It ignored pop conventions completely. No big chorus, no feel, good rhythm, just a quiet, relentless stream of thoughts, ordinary yet unsettling. For Agnetha, stepping into the booth to record those lines was like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. Imagine singing words that echo your own heartbreak, with the person who wrote them standing just a few feet away. Her voice, famously crystalline, now carried an edge of restraint, almost detachment, as if protecting herself from breaking mid-take. Behind the microphone, she gave nothing away visually, but every syllable carried a weight that no producer could fake. It was vulnerability, frozen in melody. Annie Frid, too, poured her scars into the harmonies. She was navigating the fallout of her own failed marriage, wrestling with a sense of displacement in both her personal life and her role in the band. The bright optimism that once colored her performances now gave way to something deeper: maturity laced with sorrow. Together, the voices that had once blended like sunshine now felt like twilight, still beautiful, but undeniably shadowed. That transformation was painful, but it was also what gave these last recordings their haunting power. These sessions weren't about radio charts anymore. There were no illusions of reclaiming the disco crown or topping global playlists. This was about ending with dignity, about turning heartbreak into something eternal. Everyone in that studio understood it, even if no one said it out loud. They weren't just recording another song, they were writing their own epitaph, one note at a time. On the surface, ABBA still projected professionalism. They showed up for photo shoots, smiled when cameras rolled, and spoke about future projects in interviews. But behind the locked doors of the studio, the reality was starkly different. The warm camaraderie that had once defined their work had evaporated, replaced by short conversations and an almost clinical approach to making music. Even their longtime sound engineers admitted the sessions felt cold, like a job rather than a passion. Scheduling became a logistical nightmare. Each member had carved out separate lives that rarely overlapped, and personal priorities often clashed with studio timelines. Agnetha, especially, struggled with the pressure. The media hounded her relentlessly, speculating about her private life, turning her heartbreak into headlines. Every trip to the studio meant bracing for a swarm of photographers outside the gates. For a woman already dealing with anxiety and isolation, the scrutiny was suffocating. Annie Frid faced her own battles, juggling legal matters from her divorce while trying to maintain the composure fans expected from a global icon. For Benny and Björn, the studio had once been a creative sanctuary. Now, it felt like hostile territory. The spark that had once made melodies flow effortlessly was gone, replaced by cautious steps and second-guessing. Lyrics were dissected for hidden meanings, arrangements debated with unusual sharpness. Every chord felt heavy, as if carrying the unspoken question, "Why are we still doing this?" And yet, they kept going not for fame, but for something harder to explain. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was love for the craft, even when love for each other had faded. Despite the emotional frost, when the red light flicked on and recording began, something remarkable happened. ABBA delivered perfection. Their professionalism was almost eerie. Harmonies locked in place like clockwork, arrangements unfolded with precision. It was as if the music itself demanded respect, forcing them to rise above their personal wreckage. These were not four people clinging to fame, they were artists determined to exit with grace. That discipline became their final act of unity. Still, the cracks were visible to those who knew where to look. Quick exits after sessions, separate dressing rooms, rehearsals kept to the bare minimum. The machine was winding down quietly, without the drama of a public breakup, but with an unmistakable sense of finality. And in the center of that storm stood a single song, a requiem disguised as pop, waiting to etch ABBA's last words into history. When The Day Before You Came hit the airwaves in October 1982, the world didn't fully understand what it was hearing. Fans who had grown up dancing to Mamma Mia and Dancing Queen expected something bright, something euphoric. Instead, ABBA delivered a song that felt almost unrecognizable, slow, hypnotic, and laced with melancholy. There were no hooks designed to conquer the charts, no glittering harmonies screaming optimism. It was sparse, minimal, almost unsettling in its simplicity. For some listeners, it felt like stepping into a cold room after years in the Sunday. For others, it was the most intimate portrait the band had ever painted. Critics at the time were divided. Some dismissed the track as too bleak, too uncommercial for a band whose entire identity had been built on joy. Others sensed something deeper, a quiet brilliance that only time could reveal. Decades later, those skeptics would change their minds. Today, The Day Before You Came stands as one of ABBA's most celebrated works, praised for its stark honesty and haunting beauty. What once seemed like a departure is now recognized as a bold, artistic statement, proof that ABBA refused to fake happiness for the sake of another hit. The lyrics are deceptively simple. A woman detailing the routine of her life the day before meeting you. A normal day, filled with trains, newspapers, and television, mundane to the point of numbness. But beneath that monotony lurks a mystery. Who was you? Did this meeting bring love or devastation? Was it even real, or is the entire narrative a reflection on fate, or worse, mortality? Björn Ulvaeus never gave a definitive answer, and that ambiguity turned the song into an obsession for fans and scholars alike. It's a piece of music that doesn't hand you the truth, it forces you to search for it. The performance made the song even more powerful. Agnetha delivered the vocal with icy precision, stripping away all the theatricality of ABBA's early years. Her voice feels detached, almost ghostly, and yet every word resonates with emotional gravity. Benny and Bjorn kept the arrangement sparse, resisting the urge to add lush instrumentation. Instead, the production leans into minimalism, long synth lines, steady drum machine beats, and a chilling stillness that makes the listener lean in. This wasn't just pop music. This was ABBA reinventing themselves one last time, leaving behind something that sounded more like art than commerce. In the decades that followed, The Day Before You Came transformed from a misunderstood single into a cult classic. Modern critics hail it as a masterpiece, artists cover it with reverence, and fans analyze every lyric as if decoding a secret message. It has become ABBA's ghost, the lingering sound of a band that chose to bow out, not with a roar, but with a whisper that refuses to fade. Because in that quiet, ABBA revealed a truth bigger than fame, that even when everything falls apart, beauty can still emerge from the ruins. And that truth, more than any chart position, is what keeps their legacy alive. Does this final whisper still haunt you? ABBA didn't leave with a bang, they left with a whisper that still echoes through time. The Day Before You Came wasn't a chart-smashing hit, but it became something greater, a timeless reminder that endings can be as beautiful as beginnings. It captured fragility, loneliness, and quiet resignation in a way few pop songs ever dared. And maybe that's why it remains unforgettable. Today, when you press play on that track, you're not just hearing music. You're hearing four voices closing a chapter they once wrote in gold, holding on to harmony even as everything else fell apart. It's a piece of history frozen in melody, a goodbye without fanfare, but full of grace. If you believe in stories where music becomes more than sound, subscribe now and stay with us for more untold moments behind the songs that changed the world.